Okay, thanks. So I think this goes along very well with the presentation that we had this morning, although it's much less developed than what we saw this morning. This is a project I want to tell you a little more about that is a joint project between the University of Notre Dame, the Open Environmental Data Project, and ourselves, the HDF group. In fact, Alexander and John are sort of the people who are doing the work. I'm just sort of the warm-up act here. So this is an NSF-funded effort, and this presentation, I didn't create these slides. Louis Philippe created them, and so I'm actually the actual presentation is much longer. Doesn't advance. Okay. It's this, what we call the SEEKCommons project, or it's just abbreviated the Socio-Environmental Knowledge Commons project. And there's one thing you should remember, which is the main goal of this project. It's to study, translate, and disseminate open science tools and methodologies to advance collaborative socio-environmental research. And this morning's presentation was very inspiring, and I will take some of the things that went through my head this morning back to my fellow SEEKcommoners, because this is less aimed at, this is of course much more advanced what we saw this morning in terms of citizen science, all the apps, all the infrastructures that they have created and so forth. This is really more aimed at not so much citizen science at this point, but also people who have science affiliations, but also people who don't know what science is, sort of what they call here frontline communities. Although I'm way out on a limb here. If you ask me what is a frontline community, don't press me on it. I'm not going to give you a very good definition of that. On this project, there are sort of three components of research and development. It's about open science and the field of science and technology studies and socio-environmental action research. And so there are these, I will talk a little more about specific work packages on that, or this is actually what this slide is about. So there is studying, there are studies about how science and technology studies are conducted. There will be, I forgot how many undergraduate, graduate students or research fellows, as we call them, on this project. And right now, for example, we haven't recruited those fellows yet, but we spent the summer, or I had no part in this, sort of preparing tutorials. So for example, we want to show them what are open science tools, and HDF is one of them, but it's not the only one. There are many others, the Python ecosystem, then best practices when it comes to digital object identifiers, data provenance, what is open science, what is a commons, and so we are just going through a sequence of dry runs of these tutorials that will be available online. And specifically also, I'll give a little demo in a moment. I don't know how many of you have heard about Wikidata and Scholia, two tremendous resources which we will use quite a bit in this project. And then there's also something called the Data Facilitation Consortium, where we work with projects out there, and we'll see a few examples in a moment that we feature as part of this research. And this will happen in a very, if you ask, well, what is the manifestations of this research network? It is literally, or sort of the most physical manifestation of that is to create a web, and web in the sense of the World Wide Web through Wikidata and Scholia, because often there are so many things out there, and then the question is, well, how do you find them? And one way to discover them is to, in a way, embed them into the context or co-locate them in the web sense with resources. So, for example, take the SEEKCommons. You look up SEEKCommons, unless there is sort of a connection in the network sense that you can discover affiliated projects, that you can discover data sets and other resources, unless this is all together discoverable in one place, it's very difficult to find something. And so as part of this project, this is what this so-called resource hub, there will be online resources, Jupyter Hub, for example. There will be an HSDS backend for people to experiment with their data sets. But most visibly, there will be this presence in the Wikidata database, and then Scholia, which you can think of Scholia a little bit like Google Scholar. Most of you have probably seen Google Scholar. Scholia is in a way the Wikimedia's contribution to that, but it's also open. Google doesn't share their resource. So this is sort of the contrast. Publishers, that's the IP, the intellectual property train, they don't share their resources. They harvest Wikipedia, for example. I think everybody knows Wikipedia. They harvest all these resources for training, and but they don't share the things that they create with the wider research community. Various Wikidata and Scholia, which is pretty much a front end for this, it's intended to be open source material to be released under very liberal licensing and so forth. So here's the project team. Louis Philippe, he is the PI. Shannon, she's the head of the Open Environmental Data Project. The Notre Dame team. Lane, he is an expert on Wikidata, Wikimedia, and Scholia. And then, you've seen John and Alexander already. I'm not going to, so these are some of the affiliate projects and research institutions, and maybe I'm going to skip that. So this is what I talked about earlier. In the center, there is sort of the SEEKCommons hub, which will be resources that will be used by the fellows, meaning the students in particular, who will do research under this project. And they will have an environment, containerized Jupyter Hub, and all the rest of it with all the software that they'll be using pre-installed and so forth. And but then, they will learn practices like linked data and data management plans and things like that. But I want to talk specifically about Wikidata and Scholia. Unfortunately, so this, I'm not logged in here, but all I need is a web browser. Let's see, what is this?
You're just sharing your entire screen, so open a web browser. Down at the bottom, grab Chrome.
Okay.
You're almost there.
Okay, let's see. Oh, there's now this. Right. So if you go to Wikidata, should come up. So this is a database for structured data, or central data storage, as they call it. And this is, in a way, not the interface to which you would interrogate Wikidata, but I'm going to do it anyway. As a contributor to Wikidata, you would typically come here, and you can search for any topic you want. I'm going to pick one that I know a little bit about. I'm going to pick HDF5. So if you come here, there's an entry for HDF5, and then this thing that starts with a Q, that's sort of the unique identifier that Wikidata assigns to that entry. And then there is something, okay, HDF5 has a label, there's a short description here. And then as these things go in the semantic web, so this is actually, there's a triple store behind this, where you have sort of, you can make statements, as they call them, subject, predicate, object. So for example, the statement here that we can make about HDF5, or kinds of statements that we can make, is, well, HDF5 is an instance of, and here are some examples. It's an instance of a software library, it's an instance of free software, it's also an instance of a file format, it's also an instance of the family of hierarchical data formats, and it's a data model. And there's things like logo image. It's a copyrighted thing. The copyright is held by the HDF group. So we could actually jump over to the HDF group and look about what that's all about. The HDF group is the developer. It's programmed in C. There is a GitHub repo for the source code. And then there are software version identifiers. And so here you can find, I forgot how complete this list is, but it's pretty complete. So you have all kinds of releases with their release dates. And and there's more here. There is a user manual, there's an official website, copyright license, blah, 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 MIME type, file extensions. Then there are all kinds of identifiers for certain packages in Linux distributions. I think there's also a Library of Congress, format description document, and things like that. Okay, so this is really for developers, and you can really manipulate the Wikidata database, so to speak, at this low level. But the actual front end, if you, again, keep in mind Google Scholar, that's not the front end that you get from Google Scholar. So the Wikimedia Foundation put together this thing called Scholia. And that is kind of the interface that you would use to query data in Wikimedia. So if I stick with HDF5, for example, I type in HDF5 here, and then you get suggestions here. So let's stick with HDF5, the general purpose data model, and all the rest of it. And then you see up here, you can sort of look at a concept from different angles or perspectives. You can look at HDF5 as a software. You can look at it from the perspective of use. What other projects or what other things use HDF5 or as a topic? And so if we stick with the software, okay, we find this gets populated from the Wikidata contents. You can find citations, so recent citations, publications, talks, whatever people chose to put into Wikidata, and then co-used. So there is certain software out there that uses HDF5 in some form, so that's listed here. Then it creates sort of your topics of work associated with HDF5, for example. So here you have high energy physics, bioinformatics, mechanics of materials, mechanical engineering. So all kinds of topics in the vicinity of this in some topological sense. And then people who have published things on HDF5, and then it puts together graphs like that. And so this is really the interface that you would be using, and software that's dependent on it. And so what we are planning to do in SEEKCommons is really, so right now, if you go in here and look for SEEKCommons, it's a research project, and okay, it's populating something dynamically. So here it's, for example, putting dots on a map. This is Champaign, Illinois. This is South Bend, Indiana, where Notre Dame is. And so these are the participating, or two of the participating institutions. But then we definitely, and there are a few publications here, but what we want, our ultimate goal is when you come here, that you can discover data sets, related projects, and things like that, just through sort of ingesting the right kinds of characterizations or profiles, as we call them, into Wikidata. Because again, Scholia, that's another take-home message, is Scholia is just a front end, sort of a user interface on top of Wikidata. And so I encourage everybody to look at Wikidata and contribute. So if you have an interesting paper, Google will pick it up, Google will harvest it somewhere, but please take the time to add your publications to Wikidata. Thanks.